In the dense woods of northern Michigan, where the pines seemed to stretch endlessly towards the sky, an ominous stillness often settled at dusk. This forest was old, much older than the towns that sprang up on its edges, and it held secrets that were whispered from generation to generation. Among these were tales of creatures that were not quite beasts, not quite spirits, creatures that walked in the skin of others. One such story begins on a chilly October evening, when Ethan, a 30-year-old biologist, ventured into these woods. He was drawn not by the legends or folklore, but by the need to collect data for his research on the migration patterns of native bird species. Ethan was a man of science, dismissive of the local superstitions that warned of creatures lurking in the shadows. Ethan set up his camp near a small clearing, the ground covered with a carpet of fallen leaves that whispered underfoot. As night fell, the forest seemed to close in around him. The calls of nocturnal animals pierced the silence, a reminder that he was not alone in this vast wilderness. He settled into his tent, the soft glow of his lantern casting long shadows against the fabric walls. Sometime past midnight, Ethan was jolted awake by a sound, a soft, rustling noise, unlike any animal he was familiar with. It was as if something, or someone, was circling his campsite. Cautiously, he unzipped the tent and peered out. The moon was full, bathing the clearing in a ghostly light, but he could see nothing amiss. Deciding it was just the wind, Ethan retreated back into his tent. But the rustling continued, now accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all directions at once. Heart-pounding, Ethan grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside, determined to identify the source. What he saw in the beam of his light chilled him to the bone. There, on the edge of the clearing, stood a figure. It was grotesquely tall, its body misshapen, as if it were wearing something that didn't quite fit. Its eyes reflected the light with a fierce, unnatural glow, and it stared at Ethan with an intensity that rooted him to the spot. Before he could react, the creature turned and vanished into the trees with unsettling speed. The brush barely moved as it passed, as if it barely touched the ground. Ethan stood frozen, his scientific mind struggling to rationalize what his eyes had just witnessed. Was it a bear? A trick of the light? Or something else? Unable to sleep, Ethan spent the rest of the night by the dying fire, every small sound causing him to start. By dawn, he was exhausted but resolved to leave the forest and its mysteries behind. However, as he packed up his camp, he noticed something unsettling. His equipment was scattered about, as if it had been sifted through by curious hands. The drive back to civilization was a quiet one, with Ethan lost in thought. Back at his apartment, he tried to immerse himself in his work, but the image of the creature haunted him. He began to research, poring over local archives and old newspapers, looking for any clue that might explain what he had seen. His search led him to an old legend of the Nain Rouge, a malevolent spirit said to inhabit the area, a harbinger of doom. But what he had seen didn't quite fit the descriptions of this or any other known legend. Frustrated and seeking answers, Ethan decided to return to the woods. This time, he brought a camera and more sophisticated recording equipment. He would stay longer, document everything, and perhaps prove to himself that there was a logical explanation. The locals eyed him with a mix of pity and concern when he told them of his plans. They spoke in hushed tones of other sightings, of hunters and hikers who ventured into the woods and came back wrong, changed somehow, or not at all. Undeterred, Ethan set up camp in the same clearing, his equipment trained on the surrounding forest. Night fell, and with it, a suffocating silence enveloped the area. Hours ticked by with no sign of the creature. Just as Ethan began to doubt himself, the forest erupted into chaos. A scream, high-pitched and human-like, shattered the silence. It was followed by a series of thuds, as if something heavy was being thrown around. Grabbing his camera, Ethan rushed towards the noise, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. What he recorded next would haunt him forever. The footage was shaky, the scene unfolding in quick, frenzied flashes. There, in the clearing, was the creature again, but it was not alone. It was locked in a vicious struggle with another of its kind, their bodies grotesquely intertwined as they fought. Their screams were primal, disturbingly human in their pain and rage. Ethan filmed, transfixed, until the creatures, seemingly sensing his presence, abruptly ceased their conflict and turned towards him. The camera captured their eyes, deep, malevolent, and too human, fixating on Ethan with an intelligence that belied their monstrous forms. He knew in that instant that he should run, but his legs refused to obey, frozen by the chilling realization that he had intruded upon something ancient and terrible. As the creatures advanced, their movements were unnaturally swift, their bodies seemed to blur, shifting with unsettling fluidity between forms that were almost wolf-like one moment and grotesquely human the next. The air around them seemed to warp, as if the very fabric of reality struggled to contain their true nature. Ethan's mind raced, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He remembered reading about creatures in folklore known to change shapes, legends of skinwalkers that were said to inhabit lands not far from here. Could the legends be real? Was he now a direct witness to such forbidden knowledge? With a surge of panic-driven strength, Ethan turned and ran. The forest around him seemed alive, branches reaching out like hands trying to hinder his escape. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit were a cacophony of growls and the snapping of twigs. His breaths came in ragged gasps, each one a searing pain in his lungs. He ran without direction, the woods a labyrinthine trap that twisted and turned in ways that defied his panicked senses. After what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes, the noises behind him began to fade. Ethan dared to slow, his body near collapse, and found himself by a river that roared with a deafening intensity. He collapsed on the bank, the camera still clutched tightly in his hand, its recording light blinking steadily in the darkness. As he caught his breath, the realization of his escape seemed miraculous. He glanced at the camera, its lens smeared with mud and leaves, and wondered what footage remained. Did it capture the truth, or merely shadows and fear? Ethan knew he needed to review the footage, to see with clear eyes what he had experienced, but a part of him recoiled at the thought of reliving those moments. With a weary determination, Ethan made his way back to his campsite, or at least what he hoped was the direction back. The forest no longer seemed just a place of natural danger, it felt imbued with a malignance that watched his every step. Upon reaching his camp, Ethan found it undisturbed, as if the forest had momentarily paused its breath. He quickly gathered his belongings, the unease growing as the silence stretched, a silence too deep, as if the forest was holding its breath. With one last, wary glance around the clearing, he started the long trek back to his vehicle, the weight of the camera in his pack a constant reminder of the night's terror. Driving away from the forest, the trees blurring past his windows seemed like bars of a cage from which he had narrowly escaped. Ethan's mind was a whirl of fear and questions, each mile taking him further from the darkness of the woods but no closer to understanding. Once home, Ethan locked himself away, curtains drawn and doors securely bolted. He transferred the camera's memory card to his computer, his hands trembling as he clicked the play button. The footage was there, as raw and disturbing as his memories. The video started with the rustling of leaves, the moon casting eerie shadows, then the terrifying encounter. As he watched, Ethan's own voice narrated the events in shaky whispers, the fear palpable. But it was what came after that froze his blood, a frame he hadn't seen in the chaos of his escape. As the creatures turned to follow him, a third figure stood in the background. It was watching, its form obscured and its eyes glowing faintly in the night. The implications were overwhelming. Was he being hunted? Were there more of them? What did they want? Ethan sat back, the glow of the screen illuminating his haunted face. He knew he had to go back. The truth was in that forest, woven into its very darkness. He had to uncover it, not just to prove what he had seen, but to protect others from wandering into a nightmare they could not fathom. As night fell outside his window, Ethan planned his return to the woods of northern Michigan, unaware that the story he was so desperate to uncover was already weaving him deeper into its dark heart. Continued from previous segment, Ethan spent the following days poring over every detail of the footage, each frame magnified and scrutinized. He noted the eerie silence that fell just before each appearance of the creatures, a stillness so profound it seemed as though the forest itself was holding its breath in fear. His notes became a map of terror, timestamps, coordinates, observed behaviors, and speculations about their origins. But the shadowy third figure haunted him the most. It appeared deliberate, an observer to the carnage and chaos. Determined to find answers, Ethan reached out to a professor of anthropology known for her research on cryptids and supernatural folklore. Dr. Miriam Cole had spent her career studying the phenomena that science often dismissed. She agreed to meet Ethan, her curiosity piqued by his evidence and the urgency in his voice. They met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes and ears. Ethan shared the footage with her on his laptop, watching Dr. Cole's expression shift from skepticism to a focused concern. When the video finished, she leaned back, her fingers steepled in thought. "This is extraordinary," she murmured. "And terrifying. These creatures, your description of their behavior, the shifting, it aligns with old Navajo tales of skinwalkers, but also with other global myths of shapeshifters. The figure in the background, however, suggests a different sort of presence. Perhaps a watcher or guardian of some sort." Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of validation and dread. "What do you suggest I do?" he asked. Dr. Cole was quiet for a moment before responding. "This might go deeper than we imagined. I have contacts in the cryptozoological community, experts who might help us understand better. But you should know, pursuing this could be dangerous. These beings, if they are what we think, may not appreciate being observed." Despite the warning, Ethan felt the pull of the mystery deepening. "I need to go back," he stated. "There's something pulling me there, a need to understand." Dr. Cole frowned but nodded. "If you're determined to return, then you must be prepared. I can provide you with some equipment that might help, cameras that see beyond the normal spectrum, audio devices that can capture frequencies beyond human hearing. And I'll come with you. There's strength in numbers, and perhaps together, we can uncover the truth." Their preparations took several days. Dr. Cole procured the specialized equipment and contacted a few trusted colleagues who would remain on standby, ready to act if anything went wrong. They planned their trip meticulously, aiming to reach the forest just before dusk. Ethan felt a strange anticipation mixed with fear. He was about to step back into a nightmare, but this time, he would not be alone. The drive to the forest was tense, each mile bringing them closer to unknown dangers. They reached the same clearing where Ethan had encountered the creatures. The forest seemed unwelcoming, the trees standing like silent sentinels against the fading light. They set up their equipment, cameras in a circle around the clearing, microphones pointing towards the densest parts of the woods, and infrared sensors positioned to catch any movement. Night fell, and the forest grew eerily quiet. Ethan and Dr. Cole sat back to back, their eyes scanning the darkness, every sense alert. Hours passed. The equipment hummed softly, the only sound in the oppressive silence. Ethan's eyes flicked to the monitors, watching the thermal images for any sign of life. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, a coldness seeping into the air that felt almost supernatural. Dr. Cole stiffened beside him. "Something's coming," she whispered. On the monitor, a flurry of activity erupted. The cameras picked up rapid movement at the edge of the clearing, forms shifting between human and animal, too fast to follow. The audio equipment crackled with a static that escalated into a cacophony of unnatural sounds, whispers, growls, and a high-pitched keening that seemed almost a warning. Ethan and Dr. Cole watched in horror as the forms approached, the air around them shimmering with an unnatural energy. The creatures were there, just beyond the light, watching, waiting. The watchers from Ethan's previous encounter appeared clearer now, their forms more defined, an ominous presence that oversaw the actions of the Skinwalkers. As the standoff continued, Ethan felt a pull, an inexplicable draw towards the watchers. It was as if they were communicating without words, beckoning him to step forward, to join them in the darkness. He felt himself rise, a step taken before he could think. "Stay back," Dr. Cole hissed, grabbing his arm. But the pull was strong, an almost magnetic allure that was hard to resist. The night deepened, the moon casting a silver glow over the clearing. The watchers and the Skinwalkers remained just beyond the reach of their cameras, an unsettling tableau of ancient and otherworldly power. The tension between visibility and invisibility, between knowing and the unknowable, stretched out like a taut thread ready to snap. Ethan, caught in the liminal space between his scientific desire to understand and a primal fear of the unknown, felt the watcher's gaze upon him. It was a penetrating stare that seemed to reach into his very soul, searching, examining. He shivered, not just from the cold that had enveloped them, but from the realization that this encounter was not happenstance, it was an orchestrated meeting, as if he had been summoned to this very moment. Dr. Cole, noticing Ethan's transfixed state, began to chant softly under her breath. The words were from an ancient language, one used in rituals meant to ward off evil spirits. As she chanted, the air around them seemed to thrum with energy, a vibrating barrier that protected them, yet also intensified the curiosity of their watchers. The creatures' movements became more deliberate, their forms shifting less chaotically as they approached the edge of the barrier Dr. Cole's words had created. They paced like caged animals, their forms now clearly visible as both beast and eerily human, their eyes glowing with a fierce intelligence and hunger. The equipment around Ethan and Dr. Cole continued to record everything, the screens alive with the thermal signatures and the eerie audio of this otherworldly encounter. Ethan could hear the whispers now, not just through the equipment but in his mind, voices that were ancient and seductive, filled with promises of knowledge and power, if only he would step forward. "Fascinating," Dr. Cole whispered, her eyes wide with both fear and awe. "Ethan, whatever happens, do not break the circle. These beings, they are not just predators, they are gatekeepers of a threshold we are not meant to cross." The tension escalated as one of the Skinwalkers, larger and seemingly more powerful than the others, stepped closer to the invisible barrier. It cocked its head, studying them, its eyes a mesmerizing swirl of colors that seemed to pulse with life. Suddenly, it spoke, its voice a guttural mix of growls and syllables that Ethan's mind struggled to comprehend, yet understood at a visceral level. "You come seeking," it said, the words echoing in Ethan's head. "But not all knowledge is for man to know." Dr. Cole continued her chanting, her voice now louder, more forceful. The creature stepped back, its form blurring, then sharpened again as it looked towards the forest. Following its gaze, Ethan saw that more figures had gathered, some peering from behind the trees, others standing boldly in the open, all watching the scene unfold. "This is a convergence," Dr. Cole murmured, her eyes scanning the monitors. "A gathering of different entities. Ethan, we've stumbled upon something, a council of sorts, or a trial." As they watched, a new figure emerged from the woods. It was different from the others, walking with an air of authority, its form stable and distinctly human-like but cloaked in shadows that seemed woven from the night itself. It approached the barrier, stopping just a few feet away from Ethan and Dr. Cole. The new figure raised its hands, palms outward, in a gesture of peace, or perhaps command. Its presence demanded attention, and even the other creatures stilled, their forms turning towards it in deference. "Ethan," it said, its voice clear and resonating with a power that vibrated through the air. "You seek answers that are not yours to hold. You tread paths that are not yours to walk. What is it that you truly seek here in the darkness?" The question hung in the air, heavy with import. Ethan felt every creature's eyes upon him, waiting for his response, a response that could dictate the turn of events yet to unfold. Caught between his fear and his need for answers, Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the night creatures silent, the world awaiting his answer. Ethan's voice trembled as he finally spoke, his words slicing through the tense silence of the forest. "I seek understanding," he said, his eyes locked with the shadowy figure's inscrutable gaze. "To know what lies beyond the veil of our perception, to understand what you are, why you exist alongside us." The shadowed figure nodded slowly, its form shimmering slightly as if resonating with Ethan's earnest inquiry. "Courageous," it murmured. "But some truths are too vast for the human mind to harbor without consequence." Around them, the forest seemed to breathe, a soft wind whispering through the trees, rustling the leaves with a sound like quiet laughter. The circle of creatures tightened, their forms blurring the lines between the natural world and something far more ancient and ominous. Dr. Cole stopped chanting, her eyes wide as she watched the scene unfold. She reached out, gripping Ethan's arm tightly. "Ethan, remember who you are," she whispered fiercely. "Don't lose yourself to the allure of their words. We must leave, now." But as they turned to leave, the ground beneath them trembled, and a deep, resonant growl rolled through the forest. The air around them thickened, as if the night itself was coalescing into a tangible force, pressing in upon them with oppressive weight. "You cannot leave with the knowledge you now carry," the shadowed figure stated, its voice echoing around them like a decree. "It must be balanced with a price." Fear gripped Ethan's heart as the implications of those words sank in. They were not merely researchers here, they were pawns in an ancient game, one that demanded a toll for the secrets it revealed. "What price?" Dr. Cole demanded, her voice steady despite the palpable fear. "A memory," the figure replied. "The memory of this night, of what you have learned. It is the only way to preserve the balance." Ethan felt a pang of loss at the thought of forgetting everything he had witnessed, all the answers he had sought. But looking around at the encircling creatures, their eyes gleaming with unfathomable knowledge and power, he knew they had no choice. "Agreed," he said, the words heavy on his tongue. Dr. Cole nodded alongside him, resignation etched across her face. The shadowed figure raised its hands, and a wave of energy pulsed through the clearing. Ethan and Dr. Cole staggered, their vision blurring, sounds and sights melding together into a maelstrom of color and noise. Ethan felt his consciousness slipping, his thoughts scattering like leaves in the wind. When he awoke, it was morning. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Beside him, Dr. Cole stirred, blinking against the light. "What happened?" she asked, looking around in confusion. Ethan tried to remember why they were there, what they had been doing, but the details eluded him. I'm not sure," he admitted. "Were we researching something?" Dr. Cole frowned, her brow furrowed in effort as she tried to grasp the elusive threads of their purpose there. "I think so," she said slowly. "But it's all a bit fuzzy." They packed up their equipment, the sense of something missing nagging at them, but unreachable. As they left the forest, a chill breeze whispered through the trees, rustling the leaves with a sound almost like quiet laughter or perhaps a sigh of relief. Behind them, hidden by the forest's dense foliage, the creatures watched them go, their forms blending back into the shadows from which they had emerged. The balance had been preserved, the secrets kept, and the humans left with a haunting sense of something lost, something forgotten. As Ethan drove away, the rearview mirror occasionally flickered with a shadow, a hint of something watching, a reminder of the night's forgotten horrors that might never fully release him.